It's July 1973, the largest music festival in history at the time, Summer Jam at Watkins Glen. But out of the more than 600,000 people who attended this show, two teenagers never made it home. What happened to them? Where did they go? Those are questions that have haunted family and friends for more than 50 years. On this episode of The Tape Room, what happened to Mitchel Weiser and Bonnie Bickwit? We're speaking with Eric Greenberg, an investigative journalist with Rolling Stone. He's covered the story for more than 50 years, keeping it in the headlines, and he may have just uncovered a very big clue. Eric, thank you so much for being here. I want to take you back to 1973. How old were you at that time?
High school.
High school aged. Did you have a similar sort of friend group to Bonnie and Mitch? Did you know who they were?
Yeah, well, Mitchel's best friend, Larry, lived a couple of blocks away from me. I was actually friendly with Larry's older brother. And we had people in common. I didn't know Mitchel and Bonnie, but it was the same, Brooklyn high school kind of crowd.
Do you remember when it first started to make headlines?
Yeah, it was, I was on my way back from my summer job, and I picked up the New York Post, and this was after the concert, and there was a big picture of Bonnie and a headline saying that these two kids out of 600,000 people that went to this concert upstate, these two didn't come back.
These two vanished.
Vanished.
Teenagers from your neighborhood.
Yeah.
What are you thinking?
It just hit me. I wanted to go to this concert, and my parents didn't let me go. So it made an impact for the rest of my life.
50 years later, here we are sitting, still talking about this case that you can remember from high school. What do you think has kept it in the headlines, made it so appealing for people? People are still extremely interested in this case.
Yeah, for me, it was there was something about the case and about these people that could have been me. And I wanted to try to solve, as a reporter, I wanted to try to help solve this case. So I put a lot of work and energy into it. And people seem to be responding recently to the Rolling Stone article. It was named the 13th most read article in the world in 2023. So a lot of people seem to be interested in this.
And according to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, it is the oldest missing teen case in the country.
Yeah. When I first started working on this, that's what they told me.
No bodies, very little clues, no security cameras. I mean, no real answers about anything here, about where they may have gone. Did they actually make it to that concert? Do we know that at the very least?
There are several theories, and now after my story came out, there are a lot of cyber sleuths who are actually doing work, trying to figure out where they went, where they could have been. There's new information and new theories about what might have happened. So there are some theories out there which need to be followed up on.
So here we are, the summer 1973, the largest music fest in history at the time, the Summer Jam at Watkins Glen. Did people know about this thing? I mean, are people talking about this here in the city?
Yeah, this is pretty incredible. Woodstock, everybody knows Woodstock.
Right.
This summer concert, several years later, Summer Jam, eclipsed Woodstock. 600,000 people. Woodstock, about 200,000, 300,000 people went to. And people are starting to hear about Summer Jam because it's the 50th anniversary, and people who went to it are celebrating their 50th anniversary.
And this is 200 miles north of New York City, about a 4.5-hour drive. It's a tough thing for a 15 or a 16-year-old to try and do by themselves. I mean, like you said, you wanted to go, but your parents wouldn't even let you go.
Yeah. The only way back in those days, believe it or not, kids were hitchhiking. And that's what the plan was. And, I hitchhiked as a kid. I'd never let, my kids do that today, but it was somewhat of an accepted way to get around.
And when they didn't come home, that sort of innocence of the time, was that stripped away a little bit? That, wow, something could have happened to these kids?
Absolutely. Bonnie's best friend, Michelle said that summer she realized what a dangerous place the world can be.
You and I talked to Michelle. We were out there at John Dewey High School in Brooklyn, where the two of them went to school, and it's where a memorial now sits beneath a tree. I want to just take a listen to what Michelle told us when we were out there. Let's just take a listen.
I knew her growing up in Borough Park. We were friends from our neighborhood growing up. Before that, the world was carefree, loving, safe, and that year the world changed for everybody.
All right, so let's talk about what we do know that did happen. We know that Bonnie that summer was working up at a summer camp. What was the camp? Where was she working?
It was a summer camp, popular, one of the biggest summer camps in the country, called Wellmet, Camp Wellmet. A lot of New York City area kids, Long Island, would go there for the summer. Howard Stern actually was an alumni, and he actually talks about it on his show for the last 30 years. Bonnie went there as a camper. Mitchell went there as a camper, and Bonnie worked there that summer.
And Mitch and Bonnie are dating. They're just kind of two kids in love at the time, two teenagers. And Mitch has these tickets to the concert, and he asks one of his good friends if he wants to go, but that guy's mom is like, this is a little too dangerous. What happens there?
Yeah, so actually it's the friend, Larry, gets the tickets, thinking his mother's gonna let him go. Mitchell is definitely going, and at the last minute, Larry has to back out, says, my mother won't let me go. Mitchell says, I'm gonna take Bonnie. Contacts Bonnie and then takes a bus from Port Authority here in New York up to Narrowsburg to pick Bonnie up, and then they would hitchhike from there.
A mother's intuition in that case is proven true.
Yeah,
and
it's bothered Larry ever since.
Mitch takes the bus up there, he meets Bonnie, and now they're gonna hitchhike the rest of the way, another couple hundred miles or so. What's the plan at that point?
Well, the plan is they had a sign that says, Watkins Glen.
They have a sign. We know they had a sign.
They had a
right?
sign, yeah. They had their, backpack and the clothes on their back, and that was the plan.
And they had about $25 in cash. I mean, not
Mitchell. Now. Yeah, Mitchell had $25 in order to get up to use for the bus. Who knows if they had really anything.
Now, were they actually able to hitchhike at all? I mean, anybody see them? What happens once they're together? They have their sign, they got a little bit of cash, and they go out on the side of the road. What happens?
Yeah, so they're picked up from the camp, Camp Wellmet in Narrowsburg. They make it to the highway. A truck driver picked them up, and that was confirmed. And from there, almost nothing except for the theories and the several stories that have come out since I reported on the story.
Do we know if they ever made it up to Watkins Glen?
One theory is that they did. A guy from Rhode Island claims, following my original reporting, came forward and said he hitchhiked back with them from Watkins Glen and claims that they drowned in the Susquehanna River.
I want to get to that theory in just a minute. So that's what one individual is saying, not necessarily confirmed, but it's what one person is saying. So that's something that investigators have looked into. But we do know that after the concert, they never came home.
Correct.
And their parents must have been terrified.
The parents did what I think any responsible, worried parents would do. They went up to Narrowsburg, they went up to Watkins Glen and pestered the police, law enforcement agencies there. Please help us. Our kids are missing. And they were pretty much turned away by everybody.
And Mitch is 16 years old at the time. Bonnie's 15 years old. And I mean, what kind of kids were they? Were they troublemakers?
Just the opposite. They were beloved kids. They had friends. Mitchell was working as a photographer in Brooklyn that summer at a coveted spot as an assistant to a professional photographer. That's what he wanted to do. And not one of their friends would ever say they ran away. They were well-liked. They were smart kids. And my story tries to give them a portrait of who they were.
And yet at this time, there is the theory that they were two kids and maybe they ran away, peace and love. They may have joined a commune or something like that. I mean, what is law? That sort of is the theory. This is the NYPD. This is officers up in the Sullivan County area, the Watkins Glen. Are they getting the same response? Is that what people are saying?
Pretty much. They're being sort of kicked to the road, the parents. And I uncovered a letter to the New York City Police Department commissioner from Mitchell's father saying, I can't believe that your people have like treated me like this. I came in looking for help, and they basically told me to get lost.
And days go by, weeks go by. The family is feeling like not enough was done early on by law enforcement, but they don't give up. I mean, how can you give up? This is your kids. And what do?
They kept trying. They were working class Brooklyn people, and so they weren't, flush with money. They did hire a detective, but after a few months, nothing was being found, and the money ran out. Their friends at John Dewey High School in Brooklyn actually raised money to hire another detective, but that didn't turn into anything. And after a while, time passed, and there was nothing more to do.
Case goes cold.
Yeah.
Mitch's family eventually moves to Arizona.
Mitch's parents moved to Arizona, and they made an arrangement with the New York Telephone Company to make sure that their phone number would be the same. So if Mitchell ever came back, he would know how to contact them.
So they kept the number the same. Maybe our boy is going to call us.
Yeah.
And he never calls.
No.
25 years later, in 1998, you write the first article about this. Is that right?
Yeah.
And what's the focus of the article? What's happening? You're sort of, I imagine 25 years, you're acknowledging the anniversary of it.
Yeah. So as I said, it stayed with me. And on the 25th anniversary, I said, you know what? I told my editor at my paper, I'd like to do some kind of a story about this to find out whatever happened to him. It was going to be just a basic, simple story. These kids have been missing.
Right.
But I started finding out the incompetence and negligence of the various law enforcement agencies, and that led to an even bigger investigation, which caused the governor and the attorney general at that time to reopen the case.
At around the same time, there's a new cable network, MSNBC, that is looking to find interesting and compelling stories, and they come across this one. Perhaps they came across your article, and they do a big TV story about it.
Yeah.
And that's where we get a big clue.
Yeah.
What happens after that story airs?
Yeah, you couldn't make this up. The show called Missing Persons, I think aired maybe just a few episodes before it was canceled. Think about that, because
Wow.
years later, that's all the rage. Everybody
Right.
does missing persons
Yeah.
stories now, because people are interested in it. A guy in Rhode Island sees, just by chance, sees this episode and says to his wife, "Oh, I know, I was there. I was with those kids."
With those kids.
Yeah.
Recognizes Bonnie and Mitch.
Yeah. He says, "I was with those kids, and they drowned. And I'm going to call the number that at the end of the show said, if you have any information."
Right.
So he does.
Alan Smith is his name.
Correct.
From Rhode Island. He eventually gets through to New York State cold case investigator Roy Strever, who has since retired.
Yeah.
And he tells him that he thinks these two drowned in the Susquehanna River. And we talked to Roy Strever. I want to pick up a little bit about what he said right here.
He heard a scream, looked out at the water, and there was a young girl obviously in trouble in the water. And her boyfriend jumped in, and also the two of them got swept away around a bend in the river and out of his sight. I checked with the coroner's offices in the first 3 counties in Pennsylvania that the river flows through. And all 3 had the same coroners who were there in 1973 still on duty. And all 3 said no bodies, unidentified bodies, ever surfaced in our county.
The Susquehanna River goes down into Pennsylvania and down into the Chesapeake Bay. And so he tries to track down all the different coroners all along. Nobody's ever found.
Well, actually, what Roy Strever, the retired state police guy, he didn't get. He just checked a few. There's about 40 other localities that could be checked for, missing bodies and that kind of thing.
He checked as many as sort of the resources at the time.
As he could,
had,
sure,
right,
yeah,
at
yeah,
the time.
yeah.
And there is a key element to what Alan Smith says, and that has to do with a Volkswagen.
Yeah.
A Volkswagen bus, which were very popular at the time. What does he say about that?
Well, he says he was hitchhiking back to Rhode Island, and Bonnie and Mitchell were hitchhiking back to, downstate New York. They were picked up by a guy in an orange Volkswagen.
Orange Volkswagen, okay.
And it was a hot day, no air conditioning in those days in the cars, unbelievably. And they went to cool off at the Susquehanna River. Bonnie gets in to take a dip. She's taken away by the tide. Mitchell jumps in to help. And meanwhile, Alan Smith says he and the driver are just like watching. And they disappear. The two guys get back in the orange Volkswagen and drive off. Alan then goes home and never says anything about it.
What's complicated about this version of the story, in your opinion?
Well, you would think that someone would report this. Alan Smith claims that he thought the driver would report it. And, you know, we have to talk to Alan Smith to find out more.
Were you ever able to track him down?
I did originally. I think I had the only interview with Alan Smith back in the day, and all of what I'm saying came from that. Wasn't able to get a hold of him after trying for months recently.
Investigators do think the story is somewhat credible, or at least they think through the effort that he took to contact law enforcement to actually give them this information, where he had to go through a few different layers. It wasn't easy for him to finally get through to the state trooper, to the cold case investigator here.
Yeah, no, exactly. Both Roy Striever and his late partner, Bill Kilgallen, the detective, both deemed Smith's testimony, so to speak, credible, although there are problems with it.
No bodies, a plausible enough story for some family members to accept it as closure. Is that right?
Yeah. Bonnie's mother and sister accept it as, you know, we finally know something, and gave them a measure of comfort.
Not everyone does, though.
No. Some of Mitchell's friends didn't accept it, said there's not enough. We need to go on and find more information.
And as the case has moved forward, there have been friends who've created a website where people can go to try and take a closer look at this case. What's the deal with this website?
Yeah. This website was the brainchild of Stuart Carton. Stuart is Mitchell's other best friend, and he has not let up, as he says in the article. Mitchell wouldn't have let up for him, so he's not going to let up for Mitchell. And he created this website, which has all kinds of information. And these days, people are actually going to it to give tips and suggestions on how to find them.
The Susquehanna River theory is the prevailing theory at this time, or at least it's the one that has been presented as one of the tangible options that could have happened. Have there been any others that have come forward? Or has there ever been a thought that they were killed and the bodies were buried or gotten rid of? I mean, that has to be on the table here.
Sure, yeah. And in 2010, a woman from who used to live in upstate New York, about a half a mile from the Watkins Glen concert, called the detective in Sullivan County and said she thinks her father was involved in their death, murdering them, and that caused a little response from Sullivan County. They went up to this spot. They did some digging. They never found anything. I talked to some of the family of this woman. There's some issues with her as well. But that is another theory.
No bodies, no evidence.
No bodies, no evidence.
I mean, what do you make of this case? You've followed it since you were a teenager, since you were a boy. And here we are all these years later, and there's still not a lot of answers.
Yeah. I think now with the technology, I contacted Senator Schumer's office, who said he would assist with getting the FBI involved. We have new technology. We have new ways to look at things. There's a lot of other leads to try to follow.
You know, we've seen in just the last few months that a joint task force can do some amazing investigative work, which we saw out on the Long Island serial case. Do you think that can make a difference here?
Absolutely. And that's what we're hoping Governor Hochul will announce and follow through with, a joint task force that includes state police, local authorities, the FBI, working together, because this is an intrastate case, could actually yield results finally.
So Senator Schumer's office, you've reached out to them, and Governor Kathy Hochul, with this most recent article that you've written, which sort of was on the 50-year anniversary of when it happened, also took notice. What did the governor's office say?
Yeah, Governor Hochul basically said she directed the New York State Police to work with any viable law enforcement agency and follow up on the leads that I presented in the Rolling Stone story.
As a result of your work over all these years, and especially your most recent article, something big came up. What is it?
Well, it turns out that in the summer of 1973, there was a serial killer operating in upstate New York, killing
A
teenagers.
serial killer.
Yeah,
Teenagers.
yeah,
Mitch and Bonnie were teenagers.
correct. And no one ever made the connection until now, after my article came out. And it turns out that the serial killer, Robert Garrow, drove an orange Volkswagen.
An orange Volkswagen,
Yeah,
just like the one that they saw down by the river.
correct,
Potentially what they hitchhiked from the concert.
correct.
Why didn't anybody ever look into that?
You have to ask the law enforcement folks.
That's amazing. What do we know about Garrow? I mean, where were his crimes? I mean, what was he doing?
Yeah, his crimes were within 2 hours of both Narrowsburg and Watkins Glen.
Wow.
So a 2-hour drive in either direction. And what we know is that he was convicted of murder and several years later escaped. And there was a manhunt for him in upstate New York, and the state police found him and shot him dead. But still, that connection still has to be looked at thoroughly.
Do we know how many he was accused of killing? How many he was convicted of?
I think he was convicted of 2, but there were several more that were on the table.
Did they ever question him about Mitch and Bonnie?
No,
And he's dead.
correct.
So here we have Alan Smith's story that he saw them in a Volkswagen and he rode with them in a Volkswagen after they attended the concert. And he sees them get into the river and they washed away, but maybe he didn't see that correctly, or maybe something else. And then you have a serial killer who drove an orange van, who maybe that's a link.
Yeah. As Roy Strever and I are talking about it, that should be the first thing that should be looked at by any joint state task force, trying to see if there's any link between Garrow and their disappearance.
I know you answered this before. As you look at this case, so much has changed during when it first started to when it happened now. There was no easy pass back then. These days, everyone would have a camera at the concert. And this is a case where these are 2 people who just vanished.
Yeah.
What do you make of it?
It's tragic for their friends and family, but I do think, trying to continue to be persistent and optimistic that there is a way to try to find out what happened to them.
Sort of wrapping up for us, I know that there has been a lot of finger pointing at law enforcement, and particularly at the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office. They did get back to us, and they said, I'm going to summarize what they said. They said that sheriff's detectives followed numerous leads during the 2010s, working with New York State Police, BCI and Troop E, the Steuben County Sheriff's Office, as well as the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Sheriff's detectives and their colleagues have spent thousands of hours conducting interviews, deploying search teams, and they mention you. They said that the article in Rolling Stone magazine would have you believe the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office only gave this case a cursory review. Nothing can be further from the truth. What do you make of it?
Well, I gave the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office every opportunity to talk to me at the beginning. Every missing persons expert said to me, we should be working together. Usually there's an adversarial relationship between journalism and law enforcement, but this is one of the cases where you should be working together. They didn't get back to me at all for months. They actually tried to kill the story. They told other people not to talk to me before the story ever came out. And there's a long history of Sullivan County officials admitting that they neglected to follow. They follow leads, lost files. So that's all documented.
No matter what, Mitch and Bonnie are still missing, and you're still searching for them.
Yeah.
How can people get in touch with you?
I think the best way is through the mitchelandbonnie.com. It's a wonderful tribute to them and a website. You can leave information there, and we'll take a look at it. And we're hoping that to hear from Governor Hochul very soon about any updates on the case.
The Tape Room, a true crime series created by Fox 5 New York. For more episodes, scroll down here on Fox Local, or find us on YouTube at Fox 5 NY.